Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. Just a little note, I have a subscription service available for this podcast series. You're able to get the episodes released to you a week prior, and you also get access to bonus episodes. There are currently 11 bonus episodes available to you to listen to, and they are exclusively only to subscribers. For only the price of a coffee a month, you can sign up. Some of the bonus episodes, there is one on Alphaeus Barrington's son, Jack Barrington, who was a mystery to me largely, and I uncovered some really interesting information about him. He was a professional whistler who travelled around South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales. There's also an extra episode to The Tracker where it talks about the ladies from Warringah's mission and uncovers some interesting information about the Aboriginal ladies that came from that area and the links to episodes. I've also got Ray Blair's extra to her episodes on Theo's duty. And I've also got some follow-up episodes related to the Deniliquin bank robbery, Harry Power and his family in Australia, the bushranger Frank Gardner, his family as well, are covered in a bonus episode. So I would appreciate it if you would consider assisting me in my research in the time that it takes and sign up to subscribe. I also have a Facebook page, so when you're listening to the stories, tune into the Facebook page, Family History Mysteries, as I add photos and documents and other pictures that relate to the person so you can put a face to the name as you're listening to the podcast. Episode 125, David George Irvin. David Irvin was 22 when he enlisted in World War I in 1915. Only 10 months after arriving on the front, he was declared missing in action at the Battle of Fromelles. 90 years later, DNA solved the mystery of where David was buried. David George Irvin was born on the 30th of September 1892 at Littleton, New South Wales. He was one of 7 children born to George Alexander Irvin and Elizabeth Ann Cogran. David George Irvin's grandparents, John and Rebecca Irvin, were Irish. They immigrated by the early 1850s and held a lease at Bomaderry, New South Wales. They then lived in and farmed at Wollongong and then Bamboka. John Irvin was born in 1821 and he was believed to have come to Australia from Northern Ireland. His name appears on the Colombo School petition in 1877, where his sons George, William and Foster were attending school. It is thought that John lived at Poleaxe Flat on 160 acres at Irvington. 2 of John Irvin's sons, George and Foster, married Cogran sisters, Elizabeth and Margaret, also at Poleaxe Flat, in the late 1880s. His 2 other sons, William and Ned, married Lucas girls and worked sawmills on the Tantawanglo Mountains. George and Elizabeth had 7 children and moved to the property Thorpe at Moran's Crossing, where they farmed 750 acres. George is said to have also managed the West End butter factory. Unfortunately, at the age of 45, he lost his eyesight. This did not prevent him from farming for the next 23 years. He could often be seen following the fence lines along with his cane, and he continued to use crosscut saws to cut clear timber. When milking the cows, he was able to identify every cow by touch. Elizabeth and George still made regular sulky trips from Moran's Crossing into Bibbersluke to visit Foster and Margaret. Their journey usually took 6 hours. In 1922, 8 adult members of the family were recorded as living at Thorpe. There were George and Elizabeth and their sons, Andrew, Alfred, Alex and his wife Pearl, and their daughter Rebecca, and her husband Cecil Mitchell. John, George and Elizabeth, Alex and Pearl, Andrew, Mary and Alan are all buried in the Bamboka Cemetery. Descendants of the Irvin family continue to farm in this district. So George Alexander Irvin, David's father, was the 6th child out of 9. He was born on the 17th of July 1861 in Wollongong, and as mentioned, he married Elizabeth Ann Cogran in July 1887 in Bega. Elizabeth's father, Andrew Cogran, was Irish as well, and he came to Australia in about 1850 with his parents. He married Mary Jane Keyes in Wollongong in 1856. Mary was also Irish and emigrated to join her siblings who'd emigrated prior. And Elizabeth was the oldest of 12 children. So George and Elizabeth's children, the firstborn was Andrew Hurst Irvin. He was born in 1888 in Littleton, near Bamboka in New South Wales. In 1920, Andrew obtained 710 acres at Moran's Crossing and dairy farmed, and Andrew died on the 26th of October 1932 at the age of only 44. He did not marry. The second child, William Foster Irvin, known as Willie, was born at Littleton on the 1st of October 1889. He married Elizabeth Ann Witts, known as Elsie, on the 28th of December 1911 in Cooma. He was a teacher and was living in Yass in 1913. They had 4 children. By 1930 they were living at Liverpool, and by 1954 at Cabramatta, and Willie died at Cabramatta in December 1969 at the age of 80. The third child, Rebecca Rosborough Irvin, was born in Eden in 1891. She married Cecil Stanley Mitchell at Kamarooka, New South Wales, on the 30th of April 1919. They lived at Tathra in 1954 and they had 8 children. Rebecca died in September 1962 at the age of 71. The fourth child, and the basis for this story, is David George Irvin. He farmed on the family farm at Bamboka, and then he purchased an 80-acre farm at Liverpool in March 1915. He enlisted on the 7th of September 1915 at Warwick Farm in Sydney. He was placed in the 2nd Battalion 15th Reinforcements and embarked on the Star of England from Sydney on the 8th of March 1916. And on the 11th of November 1916, in the Southern Record and Advertiser, it was mentioned that a message received by Mrs. J. Irvin, Moran's Crossing, stated that Private David Irvin was wounded on the 9th of August. And in the Bega budget on the 24th of March 1917, it incorrectly reported that David had died while he was a prisoner of war. It says Private David Irvin, son of Mr. and Mrs. George Irvin of Moran's Crossing, died when a prisoner of war in Germany. And it took until 2 weeks later in the Southern Record and Advertiser on the 7th of April 1917, says Reverend H.A. Peake received the official news of the death of Private Irvin of Moran's Crossing on Thursday. His death was announced some time ago through the Red Cross. David had been wounded in the shoulder. He was strapped and back in the field at the Battle of Fromelles. However, he was reported missing and presumed to have died on the 19th or 20th of July 1916. And in his war records, there is a letter from his father to the army from Moran's Crossing, Bamboka, on the 1st of July 1917. Sir, I request to be informed as to whether any information is available to the whereabouts and health of my son, Private D.G. Irvin. Last information to hand was to the effect that he was wounded early last August. A memo, numbered 92472, dated on the 18th of September 1916, suggested the following address: Australian Infantry Headquarters in London. No further word has been received, and I have reason to believe that letters sent to the above address have not been received by my son. Up to the time of receiving his wound, my son was a most regular correspondent. Could you inform me of his wounds and his condition, as it could be such that it would prevent him from writing? A prepaid cable was sent to the above address 3 weeks ago, but has not been answered. Hoping information is available. G. Irvin. What actually happened was that George had crossed enemy lines, and Germans were meticulous with their record keeping, and it was actually the German authorities that informed David's family of his death. His remains were located in the burial pits at Pheasant Wood, which was German territory in the battle. This was known as VC Corner, as an Australian cemetery after the war. So it says the VC Corner Australian Cemetery is situated in what was no man's land between the German and Australian lines in July 1916. VC Corner was then the name given to a nearby road junction in Allied lines. The cemetery contains only Australians. The 410 soldiers buried here following the end of World War I lie in plots to the left and the right of the central path, each plot marked on the ground by an inlaid cross. It was decided not to erect headstones because none of the bodies to be buried here could be identified. A screen wall at the back of the cemetery lists the names of 1,294 Australian soldiers with no known grave. All those buried here are commemorated on the screen wall had died during the Battle of Fromelles on the 19th and 20th of July 1916. VC Corner reflects the disaster experienced by the men of the 5th Australian Division at Fromelles. Their attack on German lines hereabouts resulted in 5,553 casualties, dead and wounded. Hundreds of the wounded lay out in no man's land, where the cemetery and memorial now stand, and many died there. Their comrades made great efforts in dangerous circumstances to rescue them, and at the same time retrieving identity discs from the dead for sending home to their families in Australia. Consequently, when it was time to bury their remains after the war, a majority could not be identified. Others had simply disappeared, and nothing of them was ever recovered. So David's resting place as an unknown soldier lasted 93 years. Through DNA, he was identified and reburied in the new Fromelles Pheasant Wood Military Cemetery in 2010, and now has a cross bearing his name. And there was an article written on the DNA discovery. It says DNA testing, eBay, and the determination of Australian soldiers to look after their own brought the remarkable story of a World War I digger from the New South Wales South Coast to light at the Chief of Army Military History Conference in Canberra yesterday. Listed as missing in action for 93 years, Private David Irvin's body was exhumed from a mass grave in 2008, identified and then reinterred with his own headstone. Members of his family were given back the bronze plaque originally presented to David's parents to mark their loss. Lifetimes have passed since February 25, 1916, when David sat down in the Liverpool military camp to write to his aunt Mary Ann. The 23-year-old was due to set sail at the battlefields of Europe in the following month, and was concerned Aunt Mary Ann had not got an earlier letter thanking her for the vest she knitted him. He said, "It fits me like a glove. In my opinion, it is perfect." The young soldier was impatient to join the Great Crusade. "I am getting a bit sick of staying here. I would like to go a bit further now." Wounded shortly after his arrival in France with the 54th Battalion of the 1st AIF, he made a swift recovery and returned to the front just in time to be thrown into the cauldron of hate, fear, fire, lead and steel that was the Battle of Fromelles. On either the 19th or 20th of July 1916, no one can be sure which, he went over the top and disappeared. In a night and a day of fierce fighting near the French city of Lille, 5,533 Australians were killed, wounded or taken prisoner. David was declared missing in action. He remained missing for the next 93 years. That changed when detective work by Melbourne amateur historian Lambus Inglesos led to the discovery of a mass grave at a place called Pheasant Wood. It had been dug up by the Germans and for that reason had not shown up in post-war grave reports. The existence of human remains was proved in 2008, and military authorities contacted families across Australia to provide DNA samples to identify individuals. That served as a rallying point for David's scattered relatives, and in the process brought to life the story of a brave young man who up until then had just been a name. When the new war cemetery was finally dedicated near Fromelles on the 19th of July 2010, at least 12 of his family were there. Great-great-nephew Wayne Douche says, "David had done his duty and it was our duty as a family to honour him. Travelling to France was something I was proud to do. I also wanted to do it for my grandmother, who supplied one of the DNA samples." Rosemary Irvin, whose late husband had been one of David's nephews, was also there. "My husband Roy's second name was David, in memory of David Irvin." A remarkable postscript to this story came early this year when Captain Tim Dorr, an infantry reservist, was scanning eBay. His attention was caught by a memorial plaque in the name of David Irvin for sale through a dealer in Western Australia. A keen supporter of the work of Lost Medals Australia, he bought the plaque and contacted his friend, Lieutenant Colonel Glyn Lenoir. They were able to locate Rosemary Irvin, and the plaque was returned to the family at the National Convention Centre. The fifth child, John Alexander Irvin, known as Alec, was born on the 15th of May 1895 at Memboka. John also enlisted in World War I. He was in the 59th Battalion and arrived in Egypt on the 19th of June 1916 and then arrived in France on the 29th of June 1916. He returned to Australia on the 24th of December 1918. He married Eunice Pearl Mitchell in Bega on the 17th of March 1920. They had 4 sons, and he farmed with the family at Moran's Crossing. John died on the 1st of September 1968 at the age of 73. There was an article outlining Alec's death. A keen football supporter and well-known farmer, Mr. John Alexander Alec Irvin collapsed and later died in the Bega District Hospital on Sunday afternoon. He collapsed at the Group 16 Rugby League Grand Final at Bega and was rushed to the Bega District Hospital, where he died. Known to many people in the district as Alex, he rarely missed a Bemboka football match. He first resided at Moran's Crossing, where he and his late wife Pearl reared a family of 4 sons: Keith of Sydney, Eric of Candello, Roy and Alan of Moran's Crossing. The 6th child was Alfred Joseph Irwin. He was born in 1899 at Bemboka. He was a policeman, and he became a policeman on the 4th of May 1922. He married Daisy Emma Patton in Tumut in 1926. They had a daughter in 1932. He was a police sergeant at Jerilderie in 1949 and in Parkes in 1958, and Alfred died in Hurstville, New South Wales in August 1967 at the age of 67. Even though it would have been such a loss to the family, hearing of the death of David Irvin, the wonders of DNA at least were able to lay him at rest and be able to be identified for his nieces and nephews and future generations. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.